Hey everyone, this is Amanda and not Rita, because today I am introducing a very special episode where we collaborated with Kathy Barron of Women Who Sarcast about all kinds of things. We went on her show and we wanted to do a cross promotion with her, and hopefully you will enjoy our conversation. I thought it was really enlightening. We talked about feminism, we talked about labels, we talked about queerness, we talked about Britney Spears. There's all kinds of really great conversations that happen. And you get to learn a little bit more about our process as podcasters and how we make the show. I hope that you enjoy.
Welcome to Women Who Sarcast. I'm Kathy Barron. My guests today are the hosts of I Don't Know Her podcast. Please give a warm, sarcastic welcome to Amanda and Rita.
Woo woo!
This is Amanda.
Thanks for being on the show, you guys. And you know, I just want to say that I've listened to a couple of your podcast episodes, and they're just very pleasant and easy to listen to, and you guys make me laugh, and you know, I just love the connection and the rapport that you both have, and it's just very easygoing. A lot of podcasts that I've listened to are just very like choppy and very awkward, and I mean, you guys just flow, and I just want to let you know that I appreciate that, because that's not very common in the podcast world.
Didn't start that way.
I don't know. I listened to your first episode, and it sounded like you guys were, you know, old pros already on the first episode.
Well, thank you. I feel like that's the best compliment we've ever gotten.
Yeah, that our first recording, the very first one, we didn't even finish because it was just like the plane was going down. It was rough.
We lost the plot for sure.
Yeah. In regards to your first episode, you were saying that this is our first time just trying out a podcast idea. So how did that idea emerge, and how is it panning out for you so far?
So I had wanted to do a podcast, and I had been like collecting a journal of ideas. And I was like, basically I had this like moment where I was like, oh, I want to talk about women in history that we've not heard of, that we should have. Like, they've done incredible, important things that we've heard of their male counterparts, but not of their female counterparts. But I also am a fan of relaxed podcasts where you learn something or you hear something useful and worthwhile, but also get to know the hosts. And so when I was thinking about who I might want to do a show with, I was like, oh, obviously it's Rita. Like, we have really good rapport. This is going to be great.
And have you guys known each other for a long time?
I think we figured out like 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we met in like 2014, 2013, around that time.
Mm-hmm. And so how is it going for you guys, since you've been doing it for a couple of years, right? How has it evolved?
Well, definitely, I would say we do have a rhythm now with how we set up, how we go about editing. You know, the technical side is a little bit more streamlined now. And definitely when we first started, and, you know, Amanda approached me with this idea, you know, I've never done anything like this. So I felt like I was maybe not quite being completely myself. And now today, like as we're doing it, I feel more relaxed and more, yeah, just being real and not trying to be, you know, something that I'm not.
Yeah, I would say that for certainly like the rapport has gotten easier. I also think that our storytelling techniques are much better. I was talking about this not that long ago, that I think that when we first started, a lot of what we talked about was like a recitation of facts. Mm-hmm. And now we're better at telling a story of someone's life and impact.
And adding your own.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. And how we can identify with, you know, their journey as well, you know, comparing it to like maybe things that we've gone through together or individually.
And you have a kick-ass intro music.
We do. So we both loved like that sort of girl rock that came out in the 90s. It was like feminist and in your face. And of course, no one did that better than L7. And we approached Jennifer Finch, and she was the one who wrote the song that we use, which is called Shirley. And we said, can we use it? Is that okay with you? And she was like, fuck yeah. And I was like, oh, that's great.
That's awesome that she even contacted you. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought for sure that one, she would just never respond.
Right.
And two, her response would be like, no. So
she was very enthusiastic about it.
Yeah. In fact, she left us a voice message. So I have a recording of it. So I think we're going to release it as some bonus material at some point.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, Amanda had texted me about it. And they were like, Jennifer Finch just called. And I was like, the fuck? What?
Well, that's a moment in time I definitely want to hold on to.
Mm-hmm.
And in your first episode, you talk about the race car driver Shirley Muldowney, which is the music, the show music is part of her story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because you mentioned that Shirley raced in Schenectady. So I'm from that area. I grew up north. My grandmother lived in Schenectady, and I lived in Ticonderoga, which is like a couple hours north. And we used to, as kids, we used to say skin, neck, titty. You know, skin, neck, titty. You know, so my siblings and I would, like, my older sister was like 4 years older than I am. We would like pinch each other and like pinch each other's titties with the whole, yeah. It's funny that I remembered that as I was listening to your podcast.
I was just really proud I said Schenectady correctly.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that.
There's sometimes where we come across words where we just try to roll right past it.
Right. Say it really fast.
Yeah, there's one episode in particular when I was talking about a place in France that I now understand is pronounced Lyon. But I said lion the entire time. And people let us know. So
right, I'm sure they did. Yeah. Yeah. Especially the French people.
Yeah, I don't speak French. I'm very clear with that. I just don't. I have, if any background, it's in Spanish, and I just didn't know that it was Lyon.
Yeah. I think the hardest one I struggle with is things that are, if my person is from Germany, like looking up all the pronunciation of those words, because we try very hard to get things right. You know, we really take an effort to get things right, but sometimes we're like, we don't know.
Yeah.
If we're wrong,
never mind. We're not going to talk about that person. We'll skip that person if I can't pronounce anything. And speaking of which, what is your process for choosing the women that you talk about?
I think that's something that's evolved over time as well. When we first started, I used to just like look around or watch a show or whatever, and there's a kid skateboarding down the street. I'd be like, oh, I wonder who the first woman who became a professional skater was. And then I'd Google it and find it and do that. But now I have a list of like 130 women and other people.
Uh-oh, Rita. You're in trouble.
So now I have a spreadsheet with their names, when they were like alive, what their primary sort of objective was as a person, activist, athlete, so on and so forth, whether or not I think it's going to be a mini episode or a full episode, and then also whether that person is a person of color or LGBTQ plus. So now my process is like real nerdy.
Mine's a little bit more footloose and fancy free. Amanda definitely is very organized, and I admire it, but I'm over here with like scraps of paper, and I'm like, oh yeah, there was that person that I'm gonna look. I save a lot on my phone. So if I'm just kind of going through stuff, I'll see something that I find, a person that I find interesting, and I'll screenshot it and I'll save it. And then later I'll go write it down. And I just have a list of names and what that person was known for, or what their accomplishment was. It's kind of interesting. Like, I'll kind of go with like what I'm feeling at the moment, because some people are very intense and it's a little much for the time. So I'll go a little bit lighter, or I'll go with maybe somebody who was an athlete. but sometimes we always come with a person that when we were doing 2 people per episode, we would be like on the same wavelength. We would bring like sometimes people that crossed each other, like in their lives even.
Yeah, or they had like similar life experiences. It was very weird. It was like we had a psychic connection.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Or both be inventors or
yeah. That's something that has also evolved, is that we decided this season, which is our 3rd, to do just 1 person per episode. Partially because time, like doing 2 people often meant that we would go really quickly sometimes, like especially if I went first and I took 40 minutes to tell my person's story, then Rita would feel obligated to go like 20 minutes. So she'd be on the fly editing out stuff she doesn't want, like, oh, this probably doesn't matter. And then we'd like, it just felt rushed. And I also decided that I wanted to get more in depth in the way I was telling stories. I wanted to go beyond what the person who could just look at Wikipedia and get the same gist. I wanted to go well beyond that and tell details that would not necessarily be accessible to the general public, which means that I've been reading like 2 to 3 books per person, like about biographies about them, and pulling out details that I think are interesting.
Yeah.
And really show a lot about that person's character. And so our episodes are just as long, if not longer, but we're only talking about 1 person this season. And I've really enjoyed that also, because then it gives me a week off in between.
That's been honestly the biggest thing, because it takes a lot of time for our podcast. On average, it's usually I was doing like maybe about 10 hours of research per person.
Wow.
And since I've gotten a little bit quicker, it's now about 7 or 8, but that's still 7 or 8 hours, out of my week.
And then 2 hours of recording. And
yeah, it's a lot of work. And I was just going to ask, if you knew what you know now before you started the podcast, would you have still done the podcast?
Absolutely.
I would, for sure. I get a lot out of it personally and like intellectually. I think it's an important show, and I know that there are some folks out there that are doing similar shows to what we do. But I think that we have a unique way of talking about our lives, our personal lives, and how that kind of intermingles with the lives of the people we end up discussing. And so there's this personal element that I think is what makes our show special. Yeah.
And also having a unique point of view. Like when we first started this, we're both queer. I'm a person of color, so we have a definite view on things that not a lot of people have.
Yeah.
Especially about being marginalized.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about having guests on your show?
Yeah, that was actually our plan for the 2020 year, and then the pandemic happened. So, a lot of the people that we wanted to have on were people who were not podcasters. So don't have mics, don't have setups and stuff at home. And so we just tabled that for the future. And so we're hoping that maybe the next season we'll be able to do that, because there are some specific people I want to talk about on the show, but I don't feel comfortable telling that person's story. I don't think it would be appropriate. Like, for instance, you may not have heard of Billy Tipton.
I have.
Yeah. So Billy Tipton is from here, Spokane. And I would like to have a trans man talk about Billy Tipton, because I don't feel that's a place that either Rita or I should go as far as telling his story. And so that is one person in particular that I want to have a guest come speak about. There was also, we had a thing kind of getting in the works to be talked about, a local Native woman who had made really big impacts and has like a whole tie to one of our local universities. And so there was an Indigenous woman from the university who was going to come on and talk about that person. But again, there was personal stuff and then the pandemic, and that just wasn't able to happen. But we do have that plan that eventually we would like to have people who represent identities that we do not represent come on and talk about people that they're interested in.
That's great. I can't wait for that to happen. Amanda, I wanted to talk about one of the episodes that you mentioned, well, this was still the first episode where they mentioned being a lifelong feminist. Mm-hmm. And you're the good kind. not a TERF.
Not a TERF.
And I have never heard of TERF. I think I've heard of it once, like a couple years ago. But I'd like to know, what is a TERF and how did they come about? What's their story?
So the actual acronym TERF is a trans exclusionary radical feminist. And it is currently probably most well known for a whole group of so-called feminists in the UK who are actively working to keep trans women out of women's spaces, quote unquote women's spaces. They've been around for a while, but they're very much believe that the idea of trans women just doesn't exist. Or it kind of has like a degrees, like there are the quote unquote feminists who think that trans women aren't women at all.
Yeah.
And then all the way to like, oh, I believe they're women, but they haven't had real, quote unquote, real women's experiences like menstruation. Mm. And I have a serious problem with that because first off, not every cis woman menstruates. Mm-hmm. Secondly, not every cis woman has children. So like the things that they use that are quote unquote for real women are often based on your physical body. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's the antithesis of feminism in general. I am not the kind of person who wants to be boiled down to my parts. Mm-hmm. I am a whole being with a whole world of experiences. And I don't think that the fact that I have a vulva or a uterus is what defines me. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want my feminism to define me or anyone else by those terms.
Yeah.
So that's what a TERF is and why I'm not one of them.
Right. And I was kind of equating it to when I'm much older than you are, by the way. Is this similar in the gay community, lesbian gay community? And this isn't identical because with the TERF, it's more about the physical part. But with this particular one, it was more about sexuality, where lesbians weren't accepting of bisexuals and they wouldn't mm-hmm. allow them in the community. They wouldn't accept them.
I think that they kind of stem from the same place, mm-hmm. which is this obsession that like the whole reason we don't like people outside of our community telling us what we can and cannot do. Why would we do that to ourselves?
Right.
Yeah. And we're still equating people's genitals with their identity.
Right.
And that's just, to me, it's like, why? Go take that exclusionary shit somewhere else because I ain't got time for it.
And I was similar to you, Kathy. I didn't know what a TERF was either. I think it was on that episode where Amanda informed me of what that was. And I was shocked. I was like, seriously?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what's your feeling about labels as far as, I remember Time magazine had 2 lesbians on the cover and it was kind of like a trend. It was trendy to be lesbian. That kind of shit it bugs me. And, I think we've grown up in different, obviously different generations of, the gay community. And it's been, it's different. I grew up in the 80s when, I'd go to San Francisco to the gay pride and it would be all about the AIDS, the AIDS going on. Every float had something to do with AIDS. So that's kind of what I grew up with. And I know that Amanda was born in 83, right? Because you said that in one of your episodes. I'm like, oh, Lord. 83. I think I was a sophomore in high school. So I know that we've grown up in different eras. Mm-hmm. But what is your take on the labeling yourself a certain whatever?
Well, I feel like I labeled myself as, a bisexual because I feel like that's how I identify with my sexuality. Mm-hmm. But just recently, with Amanda letting me know that they're non-binary and totally discovering with them that gender and identity and the physicality of people, it's like no longer all in a nice, neat little box anymore. There's such a different spectrum out there. It really opened up my eyes.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like being put into a box to begin with.
Yeah.
And it's like...
And I feel like I put myself in a box.
Yeah, I just think it's very limiting. And, you know, I think that's why I have such a hard time with, you know, someone saying, I'm a certain this. And that's fine for them. But I almost feel like it's like, why put yourself in a box? Because there's so much more than what that box is, in my opinion.
Well, labels also serve a purpose for uniting a community of people, right? Like, I didn't have a whole lot of knowledge about the varieties of gender identities until I would say the last like 5 years. And once I started to learn more about that, I started to see more of myself in those ideas and identities. And that is what prompted me to sort of have this awakening that was like, oh my God, that's more of who I am than what I thought.
Right.
And for me, it was about being able to identify myself properly, and also to find other people who were similar to me. And so I think that labels serve a purpose for the people within those labels. I don't particularly care for people labeling me themselves, like outside of me. Like, that's not your job. That's my job to do. And if I've told you a label, then that's an okay label to call me. But if it isn't, then you don't get to do that. So I think it's one of those things where you have to be really careful about, you know, what we think about people based on our preconceived ideas and biases.
Right. Yeah. I think if someone, like, you discovered part of yourself, if that's how you relate and that's generally who you are, I'd say that's awesome. I just feel like society just puts people in these categories that aren't true or not accurate. And then it's, you know, and that's what most people see, is what the media or what, you know, society throws at them.
I think society too likes to label things because it's safe.
And it makes things simple.
Right. Yeah.
You are that. I'm going to stick you in this category, and, you know, I got you all figured out, kind of thing.
Right.
I'm working with a student right now who is biracial, and I had approached her because she's a really big reader, and I thought maybe she'd like to try writing. And there's a local Black newspaper that's always looking for more young voices. And I thought, well, maybe she'd be interested in that. And so I approached her. And first off, she was like, nobody's ever asked me to do anything like that. I think I actually do want to do it. But secondly, through our conversations, I started to learn that she's like a real big farm girl. She shows animals at the fairs and county fairs and stuff, goes to rodeos, she rides horses, she does all this stuff. And I said, do you ever have people who are surprised that that's who you are? And she was like, every day. Because everybody has an assumption about what a teen Black girl is like.
Right.
And so that's what she's going to write about, is that, like, you know, people make assumptions about her based on what she looks like or her identity. And that has to do with this fact that we are a little bit obsessed with labeling people because we want to, I think it does come, I'm trying to be better about empathy. I think it often comes from a place of good faith. Like, I'm trying to understand you. But I think that there's this problem that happens when we have such simple ideas, and that's that then people don't get to be complex. And every person is complex, and we don't have a lot of room in our boxes for complexity and grayness, or the idea that someone might straddle 3 boxes at once. You know, we just don't have that language or that complexity when we have our labels.
And I think people want to understand, but it's almost like their understanding has limits. It's like, just tell me that, you know, just tell me what I want to hear, and then we're good. Yeah. So I think that's another thing that needs to be stretched.
We had a conversation one time on the show about an experience I had with a couple coworkers, where one, he was queer, and I had a female coworker, and we were kind of side by side, and she said, well, he says he's queer, like, what does that even mean? And I was like, well, I can tell you. I said, because I'm queer. And she like looked at me and she goes, but you're married. And I was like, that doesn't, like, so limited.
Yeah. And if they're open to understanding, then that's a great way to have a conversation. But I think people's delivery is definitely off a lot of times as far as them wanting to learn.
Yeah, and she laughed about it, and I was like, "Is it funny? Am I funny to you?" Like turning into Joe Pesci, like, "Am I haha funny or what?"
Yeah, exactly. So, what does feminism or being a feminist mean?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
To you personally, I guess.
Inclusion, 100%.
I think that feminism is about bringing equity, equality, and justice for all. Mm-hmm. And that you can't call yourself a feminist if you're also not anti-racist or working towards your anti-racist ideas and ideologies. Mm-hmm. Because they're interchangeable and they're intersecting at all times. One marginalized identity always has something in common with another marginalized identity and oftentimes overlaps. And we have to work better, I think, white people especially have to work better at understanding that we have to work towards that equity and justice. That's our job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely feminist is action as well. Mm-hmm. You know, you can wear the button, you can wear the t-shirt, and you can go to that one march, but like, what are you doing? What are you actively doing, especially in your community, the people around you that you live with day to day? What are you doing actively?
Yes.
Right. So Rita, you mentioned that the goal of the podcast for you was for you to step out of your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. How has the podcast changed you over the couple of years you've been doing it?
Well, definitely, I'm way closer to Amanda than I was 5 years ago. I definitely feel like they are family now to me, other than just a friend. I feel like I've discovered a lot about myself because through the podcast, I've been very open with struggles that I've had with my mental health. I had, a very bad mental breakdown probably about 3 years ago, which I was open with on the podcast. I've struggled with addiction. I've struggled with self-harm, eating disorder. And so just like being able to put that out there has been very therapeutic. And I've had people message me on the side that said, I've gone through something similar. And it's really good to know that I'm not, what people call crazy.
That's amazing. And how has that been for you to hear from people that you don't even know, but that are listening to the podcast?
It feels good to be able to show people that it's okay. It's okay to be messy. It's a part of me, but it's not everything that I am. And also, I do also share ways that I've been overcoming those issues and working towards, being a better person for myself.
Right.
It's definitely an outlet too, like being able to do the research and still learning stuff. I'm 36 and still being able to like learn something every day is really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like I'm in a whole new graduate school program.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I think as a podcaster, it's like you have this curiosity that doesn't ever go away. And I think that's what's awesome about the podcast community is that we are curious beings. And I applaud you for doing that.
Yeah, and I don't think, if I had never taken this opportunity, I think things would be different now because I do have a goal, each week to bring something to the table. Mm-hmm. It makes you feel good to be able to also bring this person that people don't know about to the forefront and share their story. And we've found some really fascinating people.
Yeah.
I bet.
People that I think one of the things that's happened for me is that because we keep talking about these people who, I think I've overcome some shit. I ain't done anything compared to a lot of the people we end up talking about. And that can be very inspirational to me. In fact, one of the most recent ones I talked about was this woman who was denied the degree she earned, and she just kept pushing and pushing. And at the age of 43, started a brand new career. Mm. I mean, I can't even fathom that right now. Like how you would have the strength and tenacity to keep pushing a system that wants to keep you quiet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what's your favorite episode of your podcast?
Oh. I don't know.
I would say in my top 5 is definitely the episode we did on, my person was Frances Perkins. She is the first woman to have served in a presidential cabinet. And she was basically the architect of all of the New Deal programs that President Roosevelt got credit for because he was the president. But she hasn't, she's not even in the history books. We learn about Social Security and our healthcare programs that were started then. And she wrote a lot of those social programs that we continue to lean on and use on a regular basis. Those were designed by a woman that we do not know the name of. And that's very frustrating to me, but also was I felt very passionate about getting her story out there and talking about it every time I get the chance to.
I'd have to say my favorite is of mine that I brought was Madam C.J. Walker. I'm still very enamored by her story. She was the first self-made millionaire Black woman in the U.S. And, she took, I very much love inventions. And she invented a line of specialized hair care products for Black women to take care of, their Black hair. And she just hustled so hard, and she made her own business, and she worked super, super hard. She was able to build this franchise that still exists today. You can find her line at Sephora today. She was also, she turned activist as well in her own community. So she was successful, and she turned that money around, and she was able to provide programs for her own community as well. And I like stories of success where people turn it around and pay it forward too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like people who don't just stand on top of the ladder, but bring somebody up with them. And that was, I think, something I found really inspiring in Madam C.J. Walker's story, was that she then turned around and put money into Black women entrepreneurs.
Yeah, she offered courses. She taught them how to, talk about the product, be able to go and create their own businesses, not just keeping it just for herself.
That's pretty amazing.
There's this really wonderful picture of her in her vehicle with a group of women, and they just have these fantastic hats with these big billowy feathers on there, and they just look fucking badass, just reading it. And it's just I want to hang out with her.
That was the first time, that story is the first time we had somebody from one of our subjects' families contact us. And it was her, I believe, great-granddaughter who wrote us an email and said, we listened to your show and we really liked what we had to say about, our relative. And we wanted you to know that her line is being re-upped in stores, and tell your listeners and stuff like that. It was really cool.
Wow, that's pretty amazing that you hear from relatives of people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty intense.
Yeah.
That was my first, I guess, a little bit of a wake up call, because, sometimes you're tired and you kind of half-ass your research. But then when we got that email, I was like, their family might be listening.
Yeah. Then you're like, oh shit, I better know my shit before I broadcast it.
Yes.
Yeah. Nothing like a little pressure, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, and a couple of the people we talk about, it's actually not very often, but some of our people we talk about are still alive. So they're they could be tuning into their own story, and you don't want to fuck that up.
Get hold of us and be like, hey, you know what? That was wrong.
Wikipedia, not so much.
Yeah, we've learned to lean away from Wikipedia for facts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the internet can be a dangerous thing sometimes.
Totally.
And speaking of, can we talk about Britney, bitch?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
In one of your recent episodes, you talk about the New York Times documentary, Framing Britney Spears. And I watched it, and I know when the episode was recorded, Amanda, I wasn't sure if Rita had a chance.
I just recently, I watched it.
Okay. It was difficult for me to watch at times because of how Britney was being treated by the paparazzi, or, you know, the interviews that she was giving. And it was actually a bit disgusting, to be honest, to witness how she was being treated. And it's like, no wonder she was acting the way she was. I mean, I would have gone ballistic if I was being treated that way about, you know, with the paparazzi and what they were saying to her. And I mean, even the interviews, was it Diane Sawyer that interviewed her? And just the questions she was asking. And it's like, you don't, they were so degrading and like so shaming. It was disgusting. You know, Justin Timberlake, and the fact that there's even a podcast that is about Britney, it just kind of floored me that there's a podcast that actually just follows Britney's Instagram.
Yeah.
But what's your take on the documentary? What are your thoughts?
My biggest take from it was like, you know, because I grew up in that generation where she was becoming a star. You know, I was in high school and it was, you know, played at the dances and everybody loved the music and wanted to be her, you know, dress like her. But when she was having her downfall, before we knew like what was really going on behind the scenes, like I almost thought like, what was my part? Because when she was spiraling, I was just like, oh, you know, she's so rich and like, what a crybaby, you know, oh, you're going to, you know, I was very judgmental. So I walked away with like, how did I feed into that? And how did I also dismiss, you know, someone in crisis?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things I really enjoyed about the documentary. I don't know if enjoy is the right word, but appreciated like that like saying that when you have one finger pointed away from you, there are three pointing back. Right. Like there was a little bit of that going on. Like, you know, I would say that there was so much media scrutiny of her body, of her words, her choices, her everything. Like you couldn't escape it.
Yeah, she was under a microscope for sure.
And I remember resenting her because of that. I resented her, not the media. I didn't really have a concept as a teenager that I was being forced to consume her because that was what they wanted me to consume. I just didn't conceptualize that. So as a teenager, I resented her being like in my face all the time. And I wanted her to just go away. I was like, you know, I hardly knew a person without an eating disorder at that time. You know, because we all wanted to look like Britney. We wanted to have abs like Britney. And, you know, it's like, that's not everybody's body type. And also I don't dance 10 hours a day.
Right. Exactly.
So I think that there was a lot being said in that documentary about how we consume people and especially women. And we like to chew them up and spit them back out. And then marvel at how messed up they are.
Right.
Well, we fucking did that.
Yeah.
And we all contributed to it in some way. You know, I do think that we're better about not doing that in some ways, but I would connect exactly what was happening in that documentary to what's happening right now to Meghan Markle. She's just being consumed, chewed up, and spit out by especially the media in the UK. Like, oh my God.
Yeah.
That is just abhorrent. And it upsets me to no end that what Britney went through 15 years ago or 20 years ago is exactly what Meghan Markle is experiencing now. And if we even tie it back to Princess Diana,
right,
fucking 30 years ago or whatever that was, like we have not learned our lesson. We just keep repeating it. And that is, to me, what we need to really take a look at as and examine as a society, which is one of the reasons why we do our show. Because a lot of times what happens on our show is we'll talk about some pop culture topic and then we'll start talking about this person who lived 100 years ago. And lo and behold, we can find all these random connections to what we're currently talking about.
Yeah. And the conservatorship to me is just boggles my mind. The fact that her father still has that much control over her, and she's like in her 30s, right? She just turned 30 or something.
Oh no, she's like 35.
Oh, she's that okay. She's much older than I thought.
Actually, I think she's older than me. So I think she's almost 40.
So to even, I mean, to think that she can't control her life, basically, is, to me, ridiculous. And I also saw in the news that some senator was looking to bring the conservatorship, how it, the whole law back into legislation to kind of look at it.
Yeah.
To maybe
she's definitely being taken advantage of. I mean, she's still making money for somebody, for her father.
Right. Exactly.
And if she's so broken down and, can't even, figure out what she's going to have for breakfast in the morning, how is she making millions of dollars successfully?
Yeah.
Yeah. The point of a conservatorship is to help somebody who is in dire need of it. They are incapacitated in some way, whether it's physically or mentally. And that may have been true at the time of her breakdown, but I cannot fathom why the conservatorship is allowed to continue. She's 39 years old. Like, she is not a child. She is not incapacitated mentally or physically, because if she were, then she wouldn't be able to still make money, right? Like, she wouldn't be able to still, do Vegas residencies and release singles and shit that you're still having her do. Like, how is that? Those two things don't compute. There's a cognitive dissonance happening there that I do not understand.
Well, and the fact that her mental breakdown was probably because of how she was being treated. So that in itself is like, wait a minute, let's go back to when this happened and what was happening to her through the media, through all the shit she was going through. And
her relationship falling apart.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine going through a breakup, with someone that you thought was your partner for life, but doing it for the world.
Yeah.
Of everybody.
Yeah, you're definitely under a microscope and being analyzed and criticized 24/7.
Yeah, she's been under more scrutiny than I think we could even fathom. That documentary just touched on it. Like, it was an hour long.
Well, the paparazzi guy that was interviewed in it, I just wanted to hit him through the screen. It's like, you are a douchebag. Just admit it. Yeah. You're in the wrong. And it was just, aggravating to hear him basically not even, not admit that he was at fault.
And his actions and behavior as a paparazzo exactly typifies how we commodify women and women's bodies. She doesn't get to be a whole human being. She is a body, a personality. Like, we get to do whatever we want to her.
And Diane Sawyer, in the name of news, and it's like, that's bullshit. As a woman, she should know better to not put down other women. And I think that's the problem that I have with the people, the women who say they're feminists. It's like, you don't punch down people, you don't trip them or degrade them if you're a true feminist.
Yeah, one of the actual questions that she asked Britney was, what do you say to people who think you're a bad mother?
Yeah.
I say, fuck you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And also, fuck you for asking me that question. Like, why would you? What does that have to do with anything?
Well, and the questions that they would ask a woman compared to a man is what gets me. It's like, would you ask a guy that? Why are you such a bad father? Yeah.
Is anybody asking like these, powerhouse directors or whatever? And what do you say to folks who think you're a bad father?
Oh my gosh.
What, they're like, what, I have a kid? What are you talking about?
Yeah, wait. Which one?
Yeah. Well, I have enjoyed talking with both of you, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. And I have nothing but admiration, and you're definitely an inspiration. And thank you so much for putting your heart and soul into your podcast, because it definitely makes a difference. And I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having us on.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You can find Amanda and Rita and I Don't Know Her podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and on social media at, is it I Don't Know Her, or is it
IDK Her podcast?
Okay. IDK Her podcast on social media. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Women Who Sarcast, an independent podcast. We welcome and encourage your snarky comments. Contact us at womenwhosarcast@yahoo.com and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Women Who Sarcast. Support us on Patreon and become part of our sarcastic community. Visit www.patreon.com/womenwhosarcast. Show music provided by Mike and Bassiani.